I'm going to talk a little bit about the global trends on displacement. So displaced people are often more vulnerable to food insecurities and malnutrition. They have had to abandon their livelihoods and assets, undertake long journeys, and settle in areas or camps with limited access to basic services, markets, or formal social networks. Their rights are often restricted due to the host country legal framework, resulting in a lack of access to land, employment, and freedom of movement. As you can see on the slide, most people are hosted in developing countries that are often dependent on humanitarian assistance to meet their basic food needs. Furthermore, the coronavirus pandemic is destabilizing entire sectors of the economy, with millions depending on fragile incomes that are now at risk. More than half of all refugees under the mandate are hosted on the UNHCR mandate are hosted in 8 countries that are already fragile states with huge numbers of acutely food insecure people. Conflicts and insecurity was still the main driver of the food crisis in 2019, but weather extremes and economic shocks became increasingly significant. In countries where funding constraints have reduced assistance in refugee camps, refugees' food security was severely threatened even before COVID. Most refugees are living in countries with restricted right to work. 70% live in countries with restricted right to work. 66 live in countries with restricted freedom of movement, and 47% live in countries with restricted access to financial services. Next slide, thank you. As you saw in the previous slide, the numbers of displaced people keep on growing globally. It can continue to increase. They are now at around 80 million people displaced worldwide. In many cases, there are limited prospects for durable solutions for refugees, either through repatriation in safety and in dignity to their country of origin. Just so to everybody's clear, these are the 3 typical durable solutions for UNHCR. Local integration with the necessary rights in the country of asylum, and resettlement to a third country, which we all know is only available for a very small proportion of the population, approximately 1% or less. Now there are other opportunities through complementary pathways, such as labor mobility schemes, where a company can offer a job opportunity for refugees in another country, education programs where you can be able to study in another country, or community sponsorship of refugees. Still, most refugees remain dependent on ongoing international humanitarian assistance, and the funding shortfalls are massive, 54% in 2020. Next slide, please. In order to support this increasing trends globally of the numbers that are displaced, it was realized that this was not something that a few agencies could work on alone. For example, UNHCR, WFP, and a few NGOs together with governments. So the in December 2018, the National General Assembly affirmed the Global Compact on Refugees. After 2 years of extensive consultations led by UNHCR with member states, international organizations, refugees, civil society, the private sector, and experts. The Global Compact on Refugees is a framework for more predictable and equitable responsibility sharing, recognizing that a sustainable solution to refugee situation cannot be achieved without international cooperation. It calls on states and partners to make available resources and expertise in support of increased self-reliance, to enhance households' ability to meet their essential needs, build resilience, improve food and agriculture production systems in refugee hosting areas. In December 2019, UNHCR hosted the first Global Refugee Forum. There were thousands of pledges from governments, organizations, development actors, and private sector, and 140 of these, or 139 to be exact, were under the theme of jobs and livelihoods. 59 were from states, 29% were at the global level, and the second highest was in Eastern Horn and Africa with 16% of the pledges. The pledges were in areas such as job creation, legal changes, fostering economic inclusion, skills, entrepreneurship, agriculture, financial inclusion, etc. Next slide, please. So now taking us to the collaboration with UNHCR and WFP. The joint self-reliance strategy in food security and nutrition aims to respond to the humanitarian challenges. It was launched at the 2016 United Nations General Assembly in the side event, the same year that the New York Declaration on Refugees and Migrants was adopted. The strategy introduces a renewed commitment by WFP and UNHCR leadership on collaboration and supporting refugee self-reliance. During EXCOM in October 2020, they expressed a high-level support to strengthen partnership and commitments to address food security in the medium to long term, including through improved refugee self-reliance and inclusion in international protection systems. The two objectives of the strategy are to strengthen livelihoods while ensuring basic food and nutrition needs are met, and to encourage and enable environment for increased self-reliance. I will hand back over to Emmanuel to introduce the next presenter.
Great, thank you, Lina. We'll now have a presentation from Dipayan.
Thank you. I hope I'm audible. Hi, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, colleagues. As we talk about this joint strategy, one of the key aspects that we need to ensure that we are not compromising on the core humanitarian principle that we always try to uphold. And we need to ensure that we maintain, our operational independence while, undertaking this collaboration on the ground. When implementing this strategy, we also need to ensure that the agencies will work to ensure that no humanitarian food and nutrition needs are neglected. In the spirit of collaboration, UNHCR and WFP, we try to work together collaboratively in a manner that is respectful of individual agencies' mandates, and we build on each other's strengths. At the same time, the agencies will work together to strengthen relationships with the government, and we want to ensure that we bring in several other partners that are working in the same area and on the issues related to food security and nutrition. We ensured that our work would maintain a result orientation in promoting refugee self-reliance by identifying and establishing clear, measurable indicators that can be monitored and evaluated. Our approach and strategy would be context sensitive, by which we mean that the efforts should be country-led and will be as sensitive as possible to opportunities and constraints that are specific to the local and national context. The very key aspect is the accountability to affected population. So throughout this process, UNHCR and WFP, we make sure that every effort is ensured to make that refugees are provided with relevant information, given the opportunity to participate in decision making, and having access to function and complaint and feedback mechanism that generally is established in such situations. A very key aspect of this collaboration and joint strategy is to ensure that protection is mainstreamed at every stage of the entire project cycle management, so that the activities aimed at enhancing refugee self-reliance are promoted in a manner that contributes to protection of refugees, and that is not compromised at any stage. And all these things should be contributing to the durable solutions. Lina just mentioned, the three aspects of durable solution. So we need to ensure that we would promote self-reliance in food security and nutrition that is designed to contribute to larger effort to achieve these durable solutions. Next slide, please. Okay, so to do that, what we do is through the humanitarian assistance, we first try to look at self-reliance in food security and nutrition in a longer term. So we have to ensure that when we are talking about self-reliance, this is not just one-off initiative, which would last for a few months. It's a longer term incremental investment. The process takes a lot of time. It should not be kind of shown as a way to move these refugees out of humanitarian assistance, direct food assistance. So that needs to be very much clear right at the outset. Secondly, the humanitarian assistance in the form of food and cash transfers are provided as a safety net that permits refugees to take prudent risks to improve their livelihoods. So we ensure that the food and nutrition security, these elements are taken care of so that, these households could be able to really invest their time and efforts in building their self-reliance capacities. And we need to ensure that when we are providing good nutrition, it helps in building human capital through greater physical and mental ability to participate and contribute in longer term self-reliance. The other element then is strengthening livelihoods. So the approach will look at livelihoods in a holistic manner and would explore different possibilities of various capitals like human capital, natural capital, physical capital, economic capital, and social capital that are appropriate and feasible in a given particular context, because we should not be really offering that we would be able to do self-reliance, by improving, all these capitals, equally. It would depend on the local context and also the situation with a strong enabling environment is critical, where we can ensure further financial inclusion, build human capital, support income generating activities, and so that these refugees would be incrementally able to participate in local labor market and local economic, they would be able to harness the economic opportunities that are available there in tandem with the host communities. And all these things are to be done in such a manner that through our actions, we are not creating any unintended negative impact on the host communities. They would be able to really complement each other. They would be able to live in harmony. So this creation of enabling environment is critical, and that enabling environment is creation of that enabling environment is possible when we engage with the local government, host communities, and other humanitarian and development partners in effective manner. Next slide, please. So talking about partnerships, of course, the very key partner in such efforts would be government. We have to ensure that we kind of follow the local, the national legal and policy framework. We try to look at what are the key provisions that could essentially contribute to self-reliance, including legal rights to work, freedom of movement, access to resources such as land, financial inclusion, integration into national safety nets, and development plans. And some of these may not be present in a context where some of you are working, and our job jointly between UNHCR and WFP is to really talk to the government and negotiate and advocate for such various inclusion elements that I mentioned. Host communities, and we need to ensure, as I mentioned, that we create a win-win situation where refugees and host communities could coexist. We encourage exchanges and commerce between the two communities. Use a market-based approach, by providing cash transfers, so that can really, can boost local economy. Provide livelihood programs that involve both the members, so that they would be able to learn and understand each other better. So create a kind of a model where the social cohesion becomes kind of one of the key elements of outcome of these initiatives. Participation of development partners and humanitarian actors are critical, including multilateral financial institutions and partners. Even private sector is extremely critical. But all these things could be possible only when we have stable economic and security situation in where the refugees are staying. So in order to really move ahead with self-reliance, we really need to ensure that there is stable economic and security context. Next slide, please. So how do we work jointly between UNHCR and WFP? What are the things that we need to ensure? The first step is joint assessment. There are multiple opportunities through which we can collaborate, and we collaborate on the ground between these two agencies. You must have heard that for many years now, WFP and UNHCR, we undertake joint assessment missions that sets the broad ground in terms of what are the various collaborative opportunities that exist. And then we can possibly go deeper into understanding what are the various self-reliance opportunities, vulnerabilities, and capacities of refugees, and what are the opportunities that are there in terms of food security and nutrition, recognizing that refugee population are not homogeneous. We try to work with partners to carry out assessments of the vulnerabilities and capacities of refugee population, so that nuanced analysis is essential to eventually develop strategies. So once we have done with these assessments and analysis, we then sit together and try to jointly review the assessment results and come up and develop a multi-year strategy for self-reliance through joint efforts. The strategies can articulate, context-specific pathways to self-reliance and improve of self-reliance in food security and nutrition, including through linkages to other development programs of the government or other actors, so that we bring in as much as possible complementarities, and also the multiplier impact that is possible when we join hands with other actors. We try to ensure that refugees receive food and nutrition assistance as their status as refugees. Under the new approach, humanitarian assistance will be targeted to only vulnerable people with verified needs. It's not that being a refugee would kind of allow them to be eligible for food and nutrition assistance. So the analysis and assessment would lead us to kind of a need-based approach, where vulnerable refugees would be, with the verified needs, would be provided support, maintaining a strong protection focus and taking account of specific requirements and circumstances of different population group. And finally, we need to ensure that monitoring system will be in place and would be used to assess those who have been phased out of this humanitarian assistance of WFP and UNHCR, in order to ensure that their situation has not unexpectedly deteriorated and international protection commitments are upheld.
Okay. No, I think these two examples that we heard today are really, really great examples of how we can collaborate better together. I think the level of collaboration that we saw in both of these cases were extremely important because of the collaboration that happened at the regional level, at the bureaus, and also at the country level, and how the two agencies were able to go through the whole process together and form strategies together, and then start looking at needs and monitoring together, and there have been joint assessments. So I really think these are a great example. Of course, there are challenges. There are not always enough funding, but I think in both cases there's also been efforts to do joint fundraising, and I think it's also important for us to stress these kind of examples internally and make sure that we have the support also internally from our organizations to invest sufficiently in these joint programs, because it's really making a difference, and it's making both agencies understand the importance of food security and livelihoods together, that none of these can go alone, that we really need to collaborate at all levels. So I think I would really like us to continue these discussions and make sure that we are utilizing these great examples of course, in our external communication to development actors and private sector in securing funding and support for long-term investments, but also to secure the support we need internally and make our management understand that it is important to invest in these collaborations and not see UNHCR as the agency doing livelihoods and WFP as the agency doing food security, which has traditionally, historically, kind of been maybe the way the management has, or the organizations have seen each other. So this joint self-reliance initiative, I think it's really the opportunity to how we change our practices and work better together moving forward. So not more specific on, I know the two cases very well, but I think they've already been explained well by our colleagues. So more at the general level, I really appreciate these two presentations and really would like us to discuss further how we utilize these experiences better. Thank you.
Thank you, Line. And Dipayan, any final thoughts from you?
Well, I think Line has very eloquently mentioned in most of the things. From my side, the only couple of points that I would like to add is, ensure that self-reliance, becomes an integral part of any refugee response right from the beginning. Don't bring it in as an add-on at a later stage. Funding shortfall is going to be the reality even, for the foreseeable future, and especially now as we see as a result of COVID, and the socioeconomic impact, the likelihood of getting more and more funds for such responses would be definitely fairly limited. So in such situations, coming up with smart solutions would be really appropriate, and self-reliance can really show us one of the ways, so that dependence on relief assistance would be somewhat less as a result of integration of such efforts right from the beginning. The other point is, it's definitely best wherever we can work together very effectively through joint programs between the two agencies. That's the best scenario. But in many countries, in reality, possibly we are not, though we are coexisting, we complement each other, but at the same time, we are possibly not, may not have joint initiatives as much as we would like, and that's possibly another ground reality. But what is very important is to continue, sitting at the same table and discuss through cluster mechanisms, etc., ensuring that our approaches are coherent, following these guidelines and standard operating procedures and humanitarian principles and durable solutions guidelines, etc., ensuring that we are not creating any parallel system and structure, and the communication that we make with the government and other stakeholders are really, really unified, rather than two voices we speak in one voice. So I just wanted to highlight some of these points.